So
Hello, Ali.
hi. I was about to launch right into it. Hi, Herman. So I wanted to start this week's podcast by asking you how your golf swing is coming along, because I know that last week when we decided to talk about visualization today, you had said that you were using it to work on your golf swing, and I think you said you were playing golf yesterday, so you must have had a few opportunities to test it out after the week of visualizing. So has it been working? How's it working? How's it going?
Well, some of it's working. Um, so yeah, it's obviously a process. It is not just a question of visualizing, but I do think that visualization is playing an important role or an important part um, in that. So I can report back that I'm still shit at golf. But there's definitely some improvement. Some of the things that I'm working on with my coach is starting to find its way in a more non-forced action in my swing.
Yeah.
So I'm careful not to use the term muscle memory there because since I became aware that there is no such thing as muscle memory, it's like one of those weasel words for me. I try not to use the phrase. I
Yeah.
think it's confusing. Um, but anyway, so I really enjoy the visualization or incorporating the visualization into part of my training and what I do. There's a couple of other areas which I'm also exploring at the moment, which has got nothing to do with golf and not necessarily anything to do with physical activity or body motion,
Yeah.
where I'm trying to apply this visualization and hopefully can make a little bit more sense out of it and get more benefit from.
Interesting. One of the things you just mentioned is that visualization is a part of the process. It's a process, and it's a part of the process of learning something or getting better at something. Um, and I think it's important to note that there's no one thing that we can do that'll suddenly make us good at something. It's definitely like part of a bunch of things. Like when Andrew Huberman talks about visualization, he says you can't visualize and get better at something that you've never done before in the physical
Yeah.
world. So you need to actually be able to do the thing before you can use visualization techniques to get better, or perfect it. Or um, one of the things that I'm struggling with, because you mentioned they're physical and not physical activities, um, I am trying to improve on physical activities, but it's things like improving my fitness, going to gym, walking more, and I'm not really sure what I can visualize to help me with that. So I think I'm struggling to find like the thing that I can use as visualization for fitness when I'm talking about it in quite a general sense.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And I don't know what the answer to that is. I think there's, for me, that almost a crossover between the visualization and the goal. So I think everyone's familiar with the idea of what are they called, dream boards or
Vision boards.
vision boards and that
Mm.
sort of thing. So there's a couple of guys that have made a shit ton of money out of concepts like that and continue to do so. And I'm not saying that they don't add value, but in other words, if it really is a goal of yours to drive a particular car, then having that there and seeing it, the same thing with a house or whatever. And when it comes to fitness and health, I think it's more of a motivator
Mm-hmm.
in that sense. So, and I think that that can take many forms. Where and how you apply it, that's where it has become really interesting since I started listening to um, Andrew Huberman describe where in your brain and what are the actions, what are the actual the chemicals that either help or hinder that. So I
Yeah.
find that very interesting because it gives me a better way to try and apply it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Another person, Dr. Daniel Amen, um, also similar kind of concept in terms of before, just before you go to sleep at night, is think of certain things, and there's that 4-1-1 method of think about four things that went well today, one thing that didn't, and one thing that you can improve on tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so so these are very practical things for me to do.
Yeah.
Um, and like anything else, it's the persistence. You've got to do this. You can't do it once and then expect big change to happen.
The golf swing
But
isn't perfect yet.
no, but if you take something like a physical motion like that, and there's like a golf swing, or let's say a gymnast trying to perfect a specific move or sequence of moves, it doesn't mean that you're going to perfect it and then, okay, cool, I don't have to ever worry about anything going wrong with it.
Mm-hmm.
But so there is this thing about, well, you've got to put in the work, like with everything else. What I would like to figure out with using visualization better is how do I use visualization to become better at maths, for example. I don't know, or learning a language.
Mm-hmm.
So this is more a cognitive skill, um, and I haven't found that yet. How do I improve my writing? And writing could, it's such a it could mean uh, writing a novel, or it could actually just mean, well, sentence construction. How do I
Mm-hmm.
write better emails?
Yeah.
Uh, and throughout that whole spectrum. So I'm not sure, I haven't come across usable tools for visualization when it comes to things like that, which are I don't know if it's the correct term to just say cognitive
Yeah.
functions.
I think so. That's brain, not physical.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because learning motor skills and certain patterns, etc., etc. There's certain things that you can do. Obviously, doing it. Now, I suppose the same could be said for some. Well, if you want to improve at maths, then what are the exercises that you're doing? What is it that you're trying to do? Do you just want to learn multiplication table? Then what are the tools that you use to do that, and how much time do you spend doing that? But I think when it comes to something like writing, is such a good example for me because there's no. I'm sure that there are certain tools and tricks and rules that you have to follow
Yeah.
to write a novel. You have to follow the following um, format, etc. And how do you improve at that? But I don't see how visualization, other than
Yeah.
the the usual bullshit about standing there receiving the whatever prize and the big check, that sort of thing in terms of, but for me, that visualization is different to visualization helping you improve the craft.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of on a smaller scale. So I think maybe it's a distinction between like manifestation and visualization. Although no, maybe that visualization is part of manifestation. Um, One of the things that Andrew Huberman mentions is the imagining the outcome, and when people manifest or visualize, they imagine that perfect outcome when they win the Booker Prize or they're standing on the stage collecting an award or whatever it is. And one of the things he mentions is that it's actually more effective to imagine the failure if you don't achieve the outcome you're looking for. So the negative feelings. So maybe it's disappointment in yourself. Maybe it's my family will be disappointed. Maybe it's I won't have lots of money that I want. It's like imagining all the things that if I'm not successful at this thing, I won't be able to provide for my family, or all of the negative outcomes if you don't. For me, with the gymming, I'm going to be looking really fat in the photographs in the future, or whatever the things are that will motivate you to actually want to achieve your goal. Apparently, that's a more effective way of imagining the outcome, is to imagine what happens if you don't achieve what you're trying to achieve, which I thought was quite fascinating.
Yeah, it's probably something to revisit for me because I have to understand why. I can't remember exactly what the reasoning was behind
Yeah.
that.
Well, I think so. This was in a different podcast where he was talking about achieving goals and setting habits. But in the visualization podcast, he does talk about the percentage of failure, where when the most learning happens during the failing, because that's when you
Yes.
can visualize how to correct the things that you're doing wrong. And it gives you something practical to work on, I suppose, rather than if you get it right 10 times in a row, there's nothing to focus on in terms of what to do
Yeah.
better. So
And
I don't
that
know
and
if it
that
was
makes it
along the same lines.
yeah. So that makes a lot of sense in terms of, you learn more in the failing. Um, Again, when it is a motor learning
It's easier to
process that you're
visualize.
in. Whereas if we kind of use the example of writing, if you write a book and it fails, and then you write another book and it fails. So, so that period in between. So there must be something that I just haven't figured out yet in between that can help you in smaller increments when it is something like that where you don't get that immediate feedback.
Yeah,
And you can't use that failure that happens constantly or instantly um, to to help improve your learning. So when you think about learning a new language and that sort of thing, it feels to me like that those failure intervals are much longer and wider dispersed as opposed to learning a motor skill, a new sport, learning to play tennis and that sort of thing, where you get that immediate feedback.
yeah, yeah. I agree with you. When I was listening to the visualization podcast, some of the brain things, as much as you say they're interesting, they went over my head a bit. And I found it hard to like make the connections between the brain and the physical, the brain and the action.
I think it's important to understand that the the brain and the function of the brain and those few basic chemicals, what role they play, and what we do can actually influence the either production or secretion of those chemicals. So, um, yes, some of those terms that he uses, Andrew Huberman, obviously highly intelligent and um, that's part of his everyday work life, so he knows all those terms,
Yeah.
etc. But it's really interesting for me to understand that some of the chemicals that we're all familiar with, like dopamine and cortisol and serotonin and adrenaline, what can I do
Yeah.
to help regulate that better with without necessarily having to download another app or subscribe to another channel or buy something, etc.
Yeah.
And then following a discipline without understanding exactly what the effect is of these things. Um, which is why I resonate with the way that somebody like Andrew Huberman or Dr. Daniel Amen, for that matter, explain these things to
Yeah.
a level where you can actually, there are so many people that tell you that breathing is extremely important in terms of calming you down, etc., etc. Um, without explaining to you what the process is, what actually happens in your body.
Yeah.
And that's what I appreciate about people like these. To me personally, it makes a hell of a lot more sense.
Yeah.
If I can make that connection, whether it's meditation or breathing or cold showers or whatever, etc., it's got
Mm-hmm.
a higher probability of convincing me that this is a practice to incorporate.
Yeah.
And nobody has done a good enough explanation yet to get me to do the cold shower
Or
thing,
the
but
ice bath.
or the ice bath, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's extremely important to understand at that level when and what actions cause what chemicals to actually be released in the brain and how much of a control that is. And then there's obviously all the downstream effects in terms of the why is it important for us to exercise? Again, kind of linking that back to these same chemicals. Why is it important for us to eat certain foods and maybe steer clear or smaller quantities of doses of other foods, etc., and so on.
Yeah.
It then makes a, a lot of all the best practices that we are told about. It makes it easier for me to understand and digest that and
Yeah.
pick which ones and knowing why. But in terms of visualization, are there any specific tips or techniques that you have employed which you can share in terms of, well, this works, or you know what, this doesn't work?
I haven't really practiced visualization myself yet. I've been reading into it, and the one thing that I noted, which I think I'm well geared to use this to my advantage, is the sleep thing. So probably in the past, I'd say in the past year, my sleep has improved drastically. I sleep really well now, and I didn't used to. I used to be a very light sleeper, wake up to all sorts of sounds and not be able to get back to sleep. And one of the things that Andrew Huberman and Dr. Daniel mention is how important sleep is as part of the process of
Mm.
visualization. That they both mention doing it before you go to sleep, and then having a really good night's sleep directly after doing your visualization techniques. So I feel like I would be well positioned to actually start practicing it. I've been trying to, as I say, figure out what I should be visualizing for where I am right now. And
Mm.
there are a couple of things I'm trying to focus on improving in my life, one of them being fitness. But as we've been talking and while I've been thinking about it and some of the things you've mentioned, actually, maybe what I should be focusing on is more the food aspect of avoiding certain foods and eating certain foods that are good for me. So maybe I need to do a little bit more research and then use that as my focus at this point, where I am in my journey.
It's interesting that you mentioned sleep. It reminded me about something really interesting in terms of the different sleep phases that we go through.
Yeah,
What is it called? The long wave sleep and early in the sleep cycle, and then REM
yes,
later on. and the difference and the actual learning happens in, especially when we talk about motor learning skills, happens in that long wave part of the sleep,
Mm-hmm.
which is quite interesting, because I recently listened to a podcast. Um, I forget the gentleman's name, but where he also mentioned the importance of, I think his name was Dr. Mike Grevlos, Grevlos. Um, and he's a psychologist, if I remember correctly, focusing on performance. So works a
Mm-hmm.
lot with athletes, um, golfers, baseball players, basketball players, that sort of thing. But he also mentioned the importance of sleep after training and learning something,
Mm-hmm.
and not necessarily just getting the good night's sleep, but in some cases also, hey, have a good nap after you have put in a work session, whether that is
Mm-hmm.
physical, whether that is studying
Exactly.
a language or whatever, and so on.
Yeah.
And that's probably something that I think I can also pay a little bit more attention to. Um, I did, quite a long time ago, become aware of these cycles and an hour and a half cycles, and
Mm-hmm.
that it is better to sleep 6 hours or 7.5 hours than it is to sleep 7 hours or 8 hours. You
Yeah.
understand that concept of um,
The different phases.
trying to, yeah,
Yeah.
like with most of these things, the important thing here is to not expect miracle results in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
That's almost like the same thing as we find with exercise. Don't be too impatient with it.
Yeah.
Is understand that these are habits that we are creating, and these things will present benefits over a long period of time. Now, I suppose if you decide that you want to, I don't know, run the London Marathon, which maybe in 2 or 3 months or something like that, it's a slightly different goal, and
Yeah.
then you obviously have to adjust your expectations and the amount of effort and so on. But I think what most of us are trying to do is build these long-term um, habits
Yeah.
which will benefit us in multiple ways. Um, and I can, from my own experience and my own journey that I've been on, I can tell you that if I compare certain physical skills that I had now with a year ago, and 2 years ago, and even 3 years ago, I can see massive improvements.
Yeah.
For most people, that's a hell of a long time. And when I started out with very specific things that I wanted to improve in, it also felt like, is it ever going to come right?
Mm-hmm.
But now, with the benefit of consistent exercise, um, etc., when I look back now at where I was like a year or 2 years ago, massive improvement. And for me, a lot of the benefits that I get from these things, so I'm not looking at visualization as a short term thing
Mm-hmm.
of there's one particular goal. I'm looking at things that I can incorporate into my life without making a huge change
Yeah.
that will that will that I can reap benefits from over the next year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever the case may be. And that's how I look at a lot of these
I like that.
techniques.
I like that a lot, and I like the idea that visualization is just one part of the process that you can add to your wheelhouse of being able to improve and get better at things. And I feel like all of this is part of that whole idea of improving every day as people. I think it's a really good way to look at it. So thank you very much. I am very early on in my visualization journey, obviously. I've watched a couple of podcasts, I've read a couple of things, but I would like to figure out how to incorporate it into the goals that I'm setting for myself. And I think I need to keep in mind what you just mentioned, is that they're not always short-term goals. These are things that could help me in the years to come and be something that becomes a part of my life in the future. So thank you for that advice, and look forward to letting you guys know more about our visualization journeys and when Herman has perfected his golf swing using visualization in the future.
Right.
We want video
It will be
evidence.
it'll be really interesting to revisit this again
Yeah.
in a couple of months and kind of see the progress that we've made, because for both of us, this is kind of like a new thing, relatively new thing.
Yep.
I definitely think that we can benefit from it. So let's revisit this in a couple of months and share
Yeah.
experiences.
Cool. Thank you very much, Herman.
Awesome. Thanks, Ali.